Welcome back to Built to Ship, the podcast where we talk to founders and product leaders who are doing the hard thing, shipping AI products that are actually real. I'm your host, Tyler Postle, co-founder of Voker, and today I'm excited to have Liam, CEO and co-founder of Closers, a company helping everyday investors make smarter decisions on real estate with AI. We actually know each other pretty well. Closers is one of the companies we've had the privilege to work with at Voker, and I've been consistently impressed with how fast they move. Liam, welcome to the show.
Very happy to be here. Thank you, Tyler.
Awesome. Well, let's start at the beginning. What's your background and what got you into building Closers?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a startup founder, have been one for many years, had a few failed startups under my belt. And yeah, no, I really enjoy sort of building different tools. And I've been in the prop tech space now for a few years. We pivoted once, but we're always learning more about the space and about our users. And yeah, that's
One of the
that's the
things, love it. Yeah, one of the things I love about you and the Closers team at large is that you really focus on your users. You do a ton of like FaceTime with your users, and so I think that pivot you mentioned, all of those things are driven exactly by user feedback, which is awesome. When you started, this company or at the pivot, either one, like what was the gap you saw in real estate investing that made you say like, we need to build software for this using AI now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for the purposes of brevity, I'll sort of stick with the pivot. But, we'd been building in the space, in the prop tech space for a little bit of time, and our previous idea wasn't quite working as we wanted. And so what we realized was that real estate investors, they do a process called running comps. And all that means is if you're looking to determine what a particular property is worth, you typically look at what similar properties in the area have sold for. We all sort of do this with our own personal houses or whatever. And that process is manual. It requires sort of digging into the data, really trying to understand, well, this house across the street sold for this much, but is it really a like for like comparison to my house, and so on and so forth. So we realized that with the reasoning models that came out, starting with, say, the O1 model last October, that all this sort of very, very nuanced analysis could now start to be automated. So what we thought we could do was to build a series of agentic flows that replicate the way that humans run comps, such that we could get it to the point where we could automate the entire process.
Amazing. That really seems like it'll help democratize and just save time for real estate investors. I'm curious, like, what in practice does that UX look like? Like, so in the background, there's these agentic flows. Are they talking to a chatbot? Is there a UI? Like, how do you think about that, and what does the product look like?
Yeah, great question. So we do have a user interface such that we can show you everything that the agent is doing, and also you can make any changes manually at the end of the automated analysis, should you wish to do so. Um, and yeah, in terms of the back end, it's sort of, a lot of API calls to a variety of different data sources. We pull data on things like, Google Street View and satellite images to determine the curb appeal of all of the different comparables. And then, of course, we have to actually get property listings themselves, and then obviously using a lot of, OpenAI as well to do many forms of the analysis. So it's a
Right.
mix of a lot of stuff.
Awesome. And I'll throw your website up on the screen for a sec too. I know there's a demo video here that shows a bit of the UI and your walkthrough, so that's a great place people could check it out.
Oh, thank
When
you.
it comes to of course, yeah. And when it comes to the typical like customer, what is success? What do they look like? Like, who are the customers of Closers, and what does success look like for them?
Yeah, so at the moment, they're mostly either buyers or wholesalers. And these are both individuals who are analyzing a lot of properties every single day. So they are, perhaps getting on the phone with sellers, trying to understand more about the property. Then they're trying to determine what would the after repair value be of this property. So in other words, if I were to fix this property up, what would be the maximum value that it might sell for once it was fixed? Um, so that's sort of the user persona. It's sort of buyers and also wholesalers who act as intermediaries between buyer and seller. And then, sorry, the other part of your question was
What does success look like for them? Like, what are they?
yes,
Yeah,
yes. So success would be like, I mean, the absolute perfect scenario is if we can one shot it. So we can get a perfect analysis, purely automated with no need for human intervention. They quickly check over the numbers. It's exactly what they would have done manually. And yeah, that's success. So success, and I suppose if you really extend that out, success would be, say, having 100 leads in your CRM that you need to painstakingly analyze, and we would analyze all 100 of those for you, in a matter of minutes, completely automatically.
Amazing. And today, like, what parts of the experience are mostly powered by AI? Where does human intuition still play a role? Do you see that, eventually humans not even being needed, or will there always be some sort of approval of like, here's the top three. Now the human decides which is the best. How do you kind of think about where humans play a role?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's one that we do think about quite a bit. I think that for a while, I think that there will be human intervention because it's a lot of money, right? So even if you get it perfect every time, even if you saw, let's say you're a buyer, Tyler, you're investing in property and you're buying a few properties every month or something like that. Even if you see the AI getting it perfect every time, you'll probably still do a quick check because if you get it wrong once, you could lose a lot of money. So I do think that there will still be human checks, especially if it's a property that you're actually really considering buying. Where there probably won't be any human involvement is with properties where we just tell you from the get-go, this doesn't even work, don't even bother looking at it. So in other words, separating the wheat from the chaff. The chaff, you probably would have no human involvement whatsoever, but then for the alleged wheat, there'd probably be some human confirmation.
Makes sense. Great. Yeah, I'd love to get into the under the hood of the AI engineering. Like, what's your stack look like, et cetera. I know we mentioned that you guys are users of Voker, but you have a really strong technical co-founder in-house. She has deep experience in AI and ML, so you're not short on in-house ML horsepower. Like, how do you decide what to build completely internally from scratch versus where it makes sense to leverage tools like Voker?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Voca really, really helps if we want to test things quickly. Also, because that way, a non-technical person or, member of the team can sort of take that load away. So maybe, Ariel, who's the co-founder that you're referring to, she can sort of allocate all of her time and brain power to the very, very complex things that we know that she really needs to sort of get into the weeds with and have to code things up manually. But if we just want to run experiments on like, oh, could the AI do this? Could it take this off our plate? Could it try that? All those kinds of tests and the iterative approaches can be done with Voca, which is fantastic, so that we can actually determine what are the things that might be worth us really investing a lot of our own time to sort of manually build up and so forth.
I love that, and especially the takeaway where something I hear you say a lot. There's two things: it's iteration, moving fast, and then thinking about users. And I think those two things seem to go hand in hand, right? Like you hear something from users, you want to ship it quickly. Especially in cases where the feature can be built fast, and then you can evolve it over time. Where I see like companies get stalled out is where they overthink this long roadmap, and then a new model comes out, and something's like now capable, and so I think a lot of AI first companies like closers, they're kind of, you guys are just thinking, let's move fast, let's implement something today, and then we'll evolve it later over time. How do you
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
about like? Oh, sorry,
And
go
you
for it.
also, no, I was just going to say, you also want to make sure that users actually want the thing that they said that they want, because they may
Yeah,
ask for something and then you want to build it quickly so you can actually put it in their hands and say, is this actually worth me building some crazy big version of this simple thing that I'm now presenting to you that you asked for?
I think all founders can relate to that. Like, customer asks for something, they say it's the most important thing, and then you ship it 2 weeks
Exactly.
later. They're like, oh, there's a new important thing. Um,
Exactly.
I want to hear like specific to real estate. Like you mentioned like you have some kind of more traditional things like just integrations with great data providers. How do you like adapt LLMs and other AI to real estate specific data? Like, is it those API integrations? Are there other like human labeling? How do you actually pull like, you know, this proprietary mode of data into the system that differentiates from someone just like asking something to ChatGPT?
Yeah, absolutely. So we obviously have to pull a lot of sort of public data on properties and neighborhood information and so on. Then what we have is we have machine learning algorithms which are really used for questions of fact. So in other words, uh, sometimes, for example, the property records won't accurately tell you whether, say, a property has a pool or not. For example, we can use some machine learning algorithms to go in depth to accurately diagnose whether it has a pool or a garage or a whole host of other things that we know are important. Those machine learning algorithms will really help us determine questions of fact, what is objectively true or not true about this particular property. So that's a sort of layer of proprietary analysis. Then we can put those with very careful prompting into LLMs, and sort of chain out the steps in a way where we know that if layered together it will yield a good result. And so that we have sort of the machine learning for questions of fact, and then we have the LLM for very sort of deep, careful reasoning. Because the thing to note about real estate is no two properties and no two neighborhoods are the same. So it's very hard to have sort of a one size fits all. You need to have a very, very sort of fluid approach. And in fact, the way that humans run comps is not the same time every time. One of the big steps is actually, which we do subconsciously, is just determining how we are going to perform this analysis with the limited data that we have available to us, because not every variation of property has been recently sold at any one period of time. You're always going to have large gaps in the data set. So you need a human way of looking at the data to really adjust for gaps, where you can infer what the value may be and where your property may slot between two similar comparable properties. So that's where the LLMs are fantastic, where we can really train them to go in depth and have sort of nuanced thinking as to where your property fits in within a wider narrative of somewhat similar properties, but often which aren't perfect matches.
I love that. I hear a lot about, and what you're saying right now, just like your process for how do you make sure that the parts that are fact are accurate and the parts that are deep reasoning are following the right kind of thought process. And that honestly was something I was going to ask you about. I'm always curious about evals that people talk about, right? Like, how do you actually judge that your AI is doing the right thing? And it sounds like you guys have a pretty great process with this mix of like, machine learning and labeled data sets. If there's anything else you want to share there, just how
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. And the nice thing as well is, we've gotten pretty good at comping ourselves manually, so we can manually check whether something made sense. And also, our users give us feedback every single day, because especially in the early days of using our product, of course, they will run an analysis manually and simultaneously run it with us, just to see what the differences are. And there is actually very little difference now with virtually all of the reports that are being run. And often we're able to sort of spot things that people don't necessarily realize themselves manually. Um, but yeah.
When it comes to your like industry and this customer persona, what do you see as a theme in terms of how they respond to AI? Like, are they looking for it? Are they excited about it? Do they know what it is? Are they, wary of, how accurate it is? Is it a spectrum?
Yes, so they're definitely very skeptical and very wary for good reasons, I would argue, because um, this is a task that was truly impossible to automate until the arrival of, say, the O1 model. Because, like I say, like a lot of companies have tried to just use, say, machine learning models to automate the process that we're automating, but it just doesn't make sense. Like if you're in an area where, say, every house is exactly the same and every neighborhood is exactly the same, and you're just sort of waiting a bit for square footage and beds and baths and basic stuff like that, which is very formulaic. Maybe an extra bed is objectively an extra 10K to the value of the house, an extra bath is an extra 15K. If all of those things were true and it was very easy to sort of make numerical formulaic price adjustments from property to property and neighborhood to neighborhood, then yeah, conventional machine learning algorithms would be absolutely fine at that. But that's just not the case, especially certain houses on the East Coast or the Midwest, where you have a house that's from 1880 next to a house from 1960 next to a house from 2023, and they're all made of
Wow.
completely different materials and have different foundations, and you just can't compare them. And you can't make these just formulaic price adjustment. That's where a human is very good, because I would argue the way the human mind, like, this is getting into a slight tangent, if I may,
Please,
but
yeah.
so like, and I'd be curious to know your opinion on this, but like computers have been beating humans at chess for a very, very long time. And I would argue that must be because there's a fixed number of moves within the game of chess. There's only and the rules are objective. A rook or a queen can only be moved in a very specific way. You can't just make up the rules as you go along. So a computer is very, very good at that. But if you think about the human mind, it has to adapt to life, and life is anything but fixed. Life is anything and everything all at once, all kinds of situations and stuff. So the human mind has to be extremely adaptable. to the fluidity, say, of life. And real estate is very much just like life. No two properties are exactly the same. No two neighborhoods are exactly the same. Everything is different. Everything is an edge case. And so that's where the reasoning models are very, very good at sort of somewhat thinking like humans and delving into the countless edge cases and trying to reconcile them.
I totally agree, and I think that's a great insight. How do you think about, so just like life is extremely complex. The human brain is complex. It's also different for every person, right? And so, sure, we have different models, like different families. There's OpenAI models, Anthropic, but every individual buyer, I'd imagine, every investor on your platform might also have their own tweaks or sort of like custom ways of thinking about things or
Yes.
metrics that matter to them. Do you have some way to control? Does your system just adapt automatically to that? Do you have controls that they have in place? Or do you just say, like, no, we know that our model's the best, even if they think this is more important, we actually know better because we have more data? How do you approach that?
It's a very good question. So we sort of do a little bit of a mix. So we have some settings that they can tinker with. And then we also have a chat bot where they can go back and forth with it to refine anything, question the LLM so that if it did make a mistake or you just need a justification for why it did something, you can do that and then make some amendments. But so this is actually a conversation that we've had, which is, do we over index more for accuracy or trust? I mean, obviously accuracy is always ideal, but I do actually think that trust is perhaps slightly more important, because at the end of the day, people, this is also an industry of people with a lot of opinions, is something that I've noted, in real estate, um, especially when you're financially incentivized to think that there's a particular property that is worth more than it might otherwise be worth.
It's a good
And,
point. Yeah.
yeah. And so there's a lot riding on it. And so I think it is better in our particular case to sort of provide trust, which it will try to be as objective as we can. But if we see you sort of going in a particular direction, I don't think the right thing to do in our case would be to just flat out say, I mean, we can tell them that they might be mistaken and you may want to double check this, but I do think we have to be more of a bicycle for their mind rather than a judge, jury, and executioner.
Hmm.
Also because we could be mistaken, but
Yeah,
like and it is a very subjective industry. Like, there isn't a universal truth of what a property is worth. It's just, what do people generally pay for a property
totally.
roughly like this?
And what are their goals in buying that property and everything? So I could see a place where, like, maybe trust and accuracy are more like them trusting that you understand what they want or how they think about investing is actually in a way being more accurate for them. I don't know. So that, I like that you think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I think the ideal case for them is an AI that replicates the way that they think. But then, and I suppose I'm sure that they would appreciate as well if it does also tell them where they may be slightly going off
Hmm.
course, if there's something that they didn't necessarily quite consider. Like, we had a case recently where there was a particular market that has really, really declined over the past 12 months, and our user was quite adamant that our valuation should have been higher. But we did sort of show them, that was true. You are correct that that was the case, but recently the market has declined quite significantly, and they weren't aware of that. So, even though it wasn't good news for this individual because they'd
Hmm.
already purchased that property over there, I think it is important to sometimes tell the truth and
Yeah,
say it how it is.
definitely. I'm curious. I want to shift a little bit towards like how you're, developing and what you're seeing are the main challenges. So I would imagine that if I asked you this question a year ago, you just say that, like, the models aren't good enough because we didn't have, O1, or I don't remember, it was a year ago. Time flies so fast, but essentially that probably would have been the biggest challenge. Now that you have that, is it the evals? Is it actually integrating with the LLMs? Is it preventing against hallucination? Is it connecting to your existing systems? Like, what do you hear from, what do you see and what do you hear from your engineering and AI teams is like the biggest hurdle towards building new features? Like, you're like, hey, our customers need this thing, ship it. Yeah, where do you find the most friction or challenge?
I would just say it's just about consistently reconciling edge cases, whereby if you overcorrect for solving for one type of edge case, You may screw things up in other edge cases because you told the LLM to over-index on one thing, whereas maybe it then under-indexed on the other thing in another time when it should have taken a slightly different path. So, like, it really, the difficulty is that it's like training a human. It's like raising a child, whereby, I'm sure it's happened with a child where you tell them, oh, you should never do this in school, whatever it is. You should never talk back to your teacher. But then maybe your teacher's a weird person, and and maybe there's a weird case where you should have talked back to them,
Yeah.
and it's like, you need that sort of human-like nuance and reasoning to really know when a rule should be broken and when it should be enforced. And I think conveying that to the LLM is a very important thing, um, because, as I say, real estate is so nuanced and is anything but sort of one size fits all. So I'd say that's very much the hardest thing. It's
Mm.
constantly sort of reconciling, contrasting nuances, things that don't make sense. Maybe you're looking at two nearby houses that recently sold, both seemingly similar, but which sold for very different prices, and you just cannot for the life of you figure out why. Um,
Mhm.
Reconciling those kinds of edge cases. And
Got
sometimes
it.
there isn't a reason, which
Yeah.
makes it even harder.
Yeah, definitely sounds like a challenging industry with how like, yeah, not clear cut it is. Is there any yeah, you mentioned earlier like how sometimes customers think they want something or say they do and then that ends up not being the case. Is there any feature that stands out that, you know, you shipped and you were like, "Oh, this actually isn't a good either use of AI or wasn't something that the customers thought they wanted but they didn't use it?" Like, yeah, any insights there? Or is it generally like, "Hey, we ship things that we, because we do all this customer discovery and it ends up fitting what they wanted."
So there's been less of that, thankfully, with this new product post pivot, but it's only been about 4 months, 3, 4 months. So it hasn't been a huge amount of time, but I think we've been better at sort of really questioning features and really validating that it really makes sense to build it. But with our, say, the previous product that we have, I can think of countless examples of users that wanted all kinds of different analyses, and then would use none of them. They'd say, "Oh, it'd be nice if you could analyze this property in 8 different ways simultaneously and tell me which one would be the best way to do it." And then they actually didn't use any of the analyses or buy a property and then stopped being in real estate altogether within a few weeks or something like that. And I should preface by saying we were selling to consumers at the time who obviously are naturally more fickle. And real
Mhm.
estate is one of those industries that is sort of subject to the guru churn cycle of watch guru on YouTube, get interested, think you get rich quick, figure out it's not as easy as you think, and then you're on to the
Mhm.
next thing. So that happens less now with businesses, thankfully, which we're now selling to businesses. Um, but yeah, that was a classic one where someone thinks they need 8 different analyses to determine whether to buy the property, and then they actually don't even, they just stop being in real estate altogether within a
Well,
few weeks.
I'm glad that there's kind of more of a strong fit and in direction with this new pivot. What's the next 12 months look like for closers? What's on the roadmap or kind of what's the focus for the business?
Yeah, just really just more of the same. Just keep talking to users, keep trying to expand to new geographic areas because that's one thing we are very much geographically constrained because we can't afford to buy data on the whole country, so we have to pick a few cities and then grow sort of city or county by county. And yeah, just keep reconciling those edge cases. That is our product. It's just reconciling constant edge cases. So just
Amazing.
more of that. And your tool is actually genuinely very useful in helping us to test things quickly and sort of see what approach might be best for what particular problem.
Appreciate that. Well, this was a blast. Yeah, really appreciate you coming on. Where can listeners go and learn more about closers or follow what you're building?
Just closers.co with a Z
Great.
or a Z, as you'd say.
Awesome. Well, yeah, again, appreciate you coming on and excited to keep watching what you're shipping next. Thanks again, Liam.
Thank you so much, Tyler. It's been a pleasure.